Welcome to Around the Empire. This is a fully independent podcast. Now more than ever, independent media needs the support of listeners and viewers. Visit the website aroundtheempire.com to find out how to support the podcast and how to gain access to the bonus content. I'm your host, Joanne Leon, and our guest today is Mark Sleboda. We talk about the likelihood of Russian intervention in Ukraine, the options available to them, and the overall situation with the standoff between NATO and Russia. Mark Sleboda is an International Affairs and Security Analyst, a U.S. Navy veteran, a university lecturer, and a foreign policy realist. We recorded this on January 26th, 2022. Mark Sleboda is here speaking to us from Moscow. Hi, Mark. It's great to see you again, and thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show. I'm sure you are a busy man lately.
Joanne, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And yeah, I've been a little busy lately.
Yeah, I would guess.
Everyone around the empire.
Yeah, the empire is a little overheated right now. I don't know if you've been following the news over here, but I mean, it's just 24/7. The hawks are out big time. The op-eds, got to use the American military. They got Biden making little gaffes and in his rare press conferences, leaking out that, well, if it's just, the whole small incursion thing that everybody freaked out about.
One of the things that some people have mentioned is that if Russia were going to be launching a major intervention in Ukraine, which I think is entirely possible, but you would think that the Russian propaganda machine, the media, would be in full bore, but that's not at all the place. In fact, the events in Ukraine were number 4 last night on events in state media. It received a minute and a half of coverage. Meanwhile, the U.S. propaganda machine is nonstop, 24/7 warmongering, demonization. It's actually a little frightening to watch because it really reminds me of exactly what I saw in Iraq, in the run-up to Iraq in 2003.
Yeah, it does. And I don't know if I don't quite know what to think, but I was super alarmed back in the spring when the same kind of thing happened then. And it was less. The ramp up was less. We didn't have, constant flights of British equipment and personnel flying over back and forth to Ukraine and back and forth and back and forth. And we didn't have any talk of American troops intervening. Well, maybe we did slightly, but you know what else this reminds or makes me think about? Back when I first started following you in the 2013-14 timeframe, remember back then how outrageous the thought of going to war with Russia was, just how that was a totally crazy thought, and how much things have changed in 8 years. Has anybody ever thought about that? I like to try to take the mindset back to a particular time and remember what the zeitgeist was, what people were thinking. But remember how that was a completely crazy thought?
Yeah. I have to say, first of all, I mean, actually the US, the UK, NATO, no one is actually talking about intervening directly in Ukraine, right? They're talking about shipping of arms, and they're talking about 50,000 troops to, go to Eastern Europe and stand in Poland and Romania and wave. But they've actually made pretty clear, Biden himself, that the U.S. will not directly militarily intervene in Ukraine, no matter what happens. I'm actually still far more worried when I see 2 carrier groups in the South China Sea, like we're seeing this week, than I do about Eastern Europe right now. I mean, particularly Ukraine, because I think that the U.S. has been pivoting to Asia for a decade now, right? They've been gathering military forces, preparing for this inevitable naval conflict to contain China in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. They've been preparing for it since the early Obama years. And they, have moved an immense amount of naval, Air Force, and even Army, gear. And they're regularly conducting these saber-rattling freedom of navigation exercises off China's coast. Joe Biden's been doing them more than once every month since he became president. But the U.S. would need to fight a completely different type of war to fight Russia in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine in particular. And the U.S. just isn't geared up for that kind of war anymore. It's not that they couldn't fight it, but it would take them a year or more to move the military assets to redirect their military, something that they don't want to do, because this is something that Russian-Chinese military cooperation is presenting them, is that they can no longer count on a one-front war. It's not that Russia and China would help each other directly, but because the geography simply makes that rather difficult. But if the U.S. got involved in a conflict on Russia's borders or China's borders, well, then that is the time that Russia would take to, guarantee their own security interests in their part of the world, or vice versa. That is the time that China would, finally say, Taiwan is part of China. You recognize that. We're going to make that a reality. And the ending of your separatist promotion of separatism in Taiwan is over. That's what scares American geopoliticians, is they cannot fight a two-front war.
So what's the point of doing all of this in your view?
Because they can't give up hegemony. I mean, the biggest threat to actual U.S. national security and actual U.S. national interests, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's not Iran. The U.S. has no vital national interests in Ukraine. They had no business meddling there, openly supporting the overthrow of a democratically elected government, however flawed, that dared say no to a neoliberal shock therapy EU diktat, right? They had no business getting involved there. They had no business arming a new Ukrainian regime that they helped put in place to kill its own people in East Ukraine as it attempted to, complete its seizure of power across the whole country, what has been going on for 8 years. The U.S. has no business promoting separatism in Taiwan, turning Taiwan into a military outpost, a big island aircraft carrier against China. They have no business in the South China Sea. Actual U.S. security and national interests in a conventional sense, they're not threatened by Russia. They're not threatened by China. They're not threatened by Iran. Russia and China are not parading their ships off the U.S. coast on a regular basis. The biggest threat to actual U.S. national security and interests is the pursuit of hegemony, global hegemony, the pursuit of primacy. The idea that we must have absolute security all over the world, which means everyone else must have zero security. Of course, that is a zero, that is no other state with any amount of independence in foreign policy can accept that. And the people that promote this, and they're engendered by a supremacist ideology known as exceptionalism, that posits American systemic and moral superiority. Therefore, they have the right to do untrammeled what they want anywhere in the world. And even if they do some bad things, it's okay because they are the indispensable country, as Madeleine Albright said it. Ultimately, it's for the cause of good. And that's a crusading mission, right? That's empire. And that's exactly what your show is about. those are the real people, and they cannot give this pursuit up, even as they see the multipolar world emerging. China, after centuries of suffering, after the colonialism raped the country, it has finally developed and become a world power again, respective of its history and its population. Russia is resurgent. The people are once again, not living hand to mouth as they did in the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed and Boris Yeltsin, practically, a drunken kleptocrat beloved of the Clintons, and the U.S. happily bragging that they got Yeltsin, reelected in Russia. I mean, it's not meddling when we do it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the time cover and the whole film spinning Boris and everything. It's not
funny
meddling.
that. Yeah.
Well, but there was an economic catastrophe in the country, which caused the suicide rate to go through the roof, the birth rate to nosedive because families couldn't afford to have children. It was like 3 Great Depressions. Well, that has been reversed over the last 20 years, and people, while not quite, say as wealthy on a per capita basis as Americans, are well off again. They have jobs, they have hopes, they have a future, they're having children. And Russia has recovered its strength, and it sees everything that has happened in the last 20 years of the unipolar moment, and seen, despite, promises that were made, with fingers crossed behind their back to a naive Gorbachev, that NATO would not expand 1 inch forward further to the east. And he wasn't the only one. I mean, we have documents showing how many Western leaders promised this, but Gorbachev was naive and didn't get it in writing. Not that, the U.S. hasn't pulled out of a dozen treaties in the past 20 years. Anyway, whether we're talking the JCPOA or the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty or the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty or the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, I mean, they've just run over all of it. They don't care. So it wouldn't really make any difference if they got it in writing. But, Russia says now that, we're at a red line here. We see the de facto NATOization of Ukraine after the U.S. helped flip the government in 2014. We see Russia sees 10,000 NATO trainers and advisors on the ground. 10,000, right? I mean, that shades of Vietnam to anyone who remembers that era.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's absolutely insane. The UK has announced that they will be building military bases in Ukraine, on the Black Sea and in the Sea of Azov. Turkey, a NATO member, has sold the regime in Kiev Bayraktar TB2 combat drones, which it has used to launch airstrikes against the people of East Ukraine.
A totally broke country too.
Yeah. Oh, well, it exists on the IMF drip feed. Right, which means ultimately that Western taxpayers are paying for all of this.
Yeah,
not only the direct military, but also just to support, the government continuing to function. Yeah. You now see all of these weapon systems coming into Ukraine, right? Missile systems, javelins, artillery pieces from Europe,
Stinger missiles,
RPGs.
RPG,
javelins, advanced anti-tank missiles. All of this is pouring in, and Russia says this is a red line for us, right? This is, it was suggested just in the last couple of weeks that one of the things that Russia might do in response to all this, they have a range of options. Russia has said if their security guarantees are not met, i.e., NATO promises not to move any further eastward, right? Doesn't try to absorb Ukraine and Georgia, and they had a number of other demands, but among that was that they forced their client regime in Kiev to finally, after 7 years, fulfill the Minsk II Accords, which have been enshrined in international law in a UN Security Council resolution that the US and the UK and everyone else agreed to, but that they haven't. and they continue to shell the people of East Ukraine who live in Donbass, who live half in their basements for 8 years now. And Russia says, you promise NATO is not going to move any further eastward, and you promise to make your pet regime in Kiev actually live up to what you and they promised to do in the Minsk Accords to politically reconcile the country finally after the events of the putsch in 2014, or we will guarantee our security as we need to. We will take action. And they say, well, what is that action? And the words that the Russian government has used is, we will take military technical measures. What does that mean, right? That is the Russian diplomatic speak equivalent of all options are on the table. Mm. That is what they're saying. Now, there's a range of options. There's, we could put a new hypersonic missile systems in Kaliningrad, right? The Russian exclave, on Poland's border. We could reopen military bases in Cuba. You remember that? Because what the Russian government keeps saying is, this is an existential Cuban missile crisis scenario for us. That's the way we feel it. And or Venezuela, right? And what the immediate U.S. government response to even the suggestion that is, they would take immediate and decisive action. Wait a minute. So if something happens somewhere in your hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine, you take immediate and decisive action. But Russia is not allowed to set red lines. Russia is not allowed to have security guarantees.
Not allowed to have a sphere of influence, which this has been going on for a number of years. This kind of hypocrisy. I've seen people just come right in and say, yeah, I mean, I've heard them actually say, well, no, they're not allowed to have even with a porous land border, you know what I mean? It's like
the Taiwan Straits
are not going to fly. This stuff is not going to fly. But they keep doing it.
The Black Sea is our sphere of influence. Iraq is our sphere of influence. Everything is the U.S. sphere of influence, but no one else has a sphere of influence. Okay, well, that's hegemony. And Russia's not going to accept that. So they see this hypocrisy. They've been very clear in this. They've been clear for decades now. And actually intelligent Western military and security analysts, right? Not crazy lefties or anyone, but serious people like Michael Kaufman at the Center for New American Security, Anatol Lievin at the Kinsey Institute. These are serious people. They're realists, right? They're not liberals or liberal imperialists, or their flip side neocons. There's really no difference between the two anymore. I mean, take a look. Both Obama and Biden had neocons all throughout the foreign policy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
So they're serious people, and they say, look, Russia has been saying this for decades now, and you've been ignoring it, and you have been increasing your security or your geopolitical consolidation actually at the expense of Russian security. And there's an argument, that NATO is just a defensive organization. It's all rainbows and bunnies and unicorns, right? And that is, of course, complete nonsense. It is complete counterfactual to what NATO and its member states have done in the world just for the last 30 years, right? Just since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. I mean, we're taking a look at Serbia, which was illegally attacked by NATO, right? Without UN Security Council approval. And Kosovo was carved out of the country and turned into a little NATO protectorate and narco state. And the group that the US had right until that conflict had recognized as a terrorist organization, the Kosovo Liberation Army, good friends with Al-Qaeda, was put in charge of Kosovo and is still essentially in charge of Kosovo to this day, right? But because it was about geopolitics, not about anything else. And then Libya, right? The overthrow and the brutal murder of Gaddafi, and that country turned into a terrorist haven, warlord, civil war driven with slavery returning and people being sold on blocks, and then a migration flood into Europe. It's destabilized the entire Sahel, the entire North Africa. And then in Iraq and Afghanistan, NATO served a back role up to, their primary member, the United States, after their invasion and military occupations of both countries. NATO moved in behind them to provide a political fig leaf of justification, and then put troops on the ground to participate in the occupation. So don't say that NATO is a defensive organization, because NATO has never. I mean, I'm a U.S. military veteran. I served in the Navy and I served in NATO operations. NATO has never been used as a defensive organization against another state. Article 5 has never been invoked against another state. You can talk Al-Qaeda if you want a terrorist organization, which is a little bit ludicrous to go and invade an entire country over it. And ultimately, 20 years later, they paid the price for that. But NATO is an offensive military organization. Since the end of the Cold War, they have become a platform for the U.S. to project military force around the world in pursuit of global military hegemony. And you don't have to take my words for it. You can take the NATO Secretary General's words for it, because Jens Stoltenberg, when he was arguing to Trump, who was suspicious of NATO's utility and the cost, Jens Stoltenberg said, look how useful we are for you to project military power into the Middle East. You would not be able to do with that. That is why you need NATO. And, that's perfectly clear. It's these overseas operations, out of theater operations, as NATO calls it. And Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, all this year up until the last couple months, all he was talking about how NATO needs to extend its influence and redirect its focus towards the Western Pacific against China.
Yeah, I mean, the tides must be really rising, Mark, because that Northern Atlantic's really getting big. It's covering the whole damn globe.
It is. So that is a lot of people say NATO has no purpose. It does. It's just not the purpose on the box, right?
Yeah.
The original stated purpose of NATO, yes, a defensive organization in writing, but the stated purpose was accepted to be to keep the U.S. in Europe, to keep Russia out of Europe, and to keep Germany down. Well, it still basically does that. I mean, the U.S. was just sanctioning its own treaty ally, Germany, for daring to build a pipeline with Russia to bring gas, a second pipeline under the Baltics to bring gas directly from Russia to Germany. Because obviously the U.S. knows Germany's energy security needs better than Germany does.
Yeah, apparently. Can we get back to the Russia's options too? Because
yes.
One thing I'm curious about is what are they, exercises in Belarus? Yes. Are they starting right now, or they're still setting up?
They're starting.
And then I'm not sure exactly where in Belarus these operations are, but like how close does that position them to Kiev?
80 kilometers away.
Ooh. Okay.
This is the third military option, and it is a serious military option that's on the table. I do not believe, and every other, again, serious U.S. military analyst, not the screaming their heads off Russophobic, talking heads, not.
Put them in a different category.
Yeah, the serious ones. The headlines all say that Russia is building up military troops on the Ukrainian border. That's actually technically not true. They aren't. Russia has had 60 to 90,000 troops on the Ukrainian border since the overthrow of the government and the civil conflict broke out there in 2014. And if you actually listen to the Ukrainian government now, the comedian turned president of the Maidan regime, Zelensky, or the head of the Ukrainian military, they're saying actually there isn't any big Russian military buildup right on our borders. In fact, Ukraine has more troops on their border there with Donbass and Russia than Russia does. They have 125,000 troops there. That's half of their entire military. But what Russia has been doing at the same time as Ukraine has been building up troops in the east of their own country. Again, obviously testing and probing, which they have been doing repeatedly for years now, looking for weakness, political weakness, military weakness to try to seize the Donbass by force. And, forgetting the Minsk Accords, of course. But Russia has changed their force posture in Western Russia. And this sounds, technical and so on. But if you actually read into past the headlines, past the talking heads, if you actually read, like, say, into a serious newspaper like the Washington Post, more, serious, quote unquote. But if you read in about 4 paragraphs, you'll notice, when they were talking about in detail about the Russian military buildup, that they don't say that there is a huge Russian military buildup right on the Ukrainian border, but that they have created logistical centers further back in their own country, in Western Russia, with equipment, staging areas, several hundred kilometers back, where they could, in short order, gather troops to then set up and mass troops on the border for an actual intervention. You may say that that's parsing hairs, but are you going to dictate that Russia, I don't know, can't station its own troops in the West?
No, I would do the same thing. I'd do the same thing if I were them.
So the Russian military generals were asked with coming up with a range of options. They have come up with a range of options, and then they have put into operation the preparations so that if given any of those orders, they could enact them. And one of them that we have seen is yes, with this preparation for a potential intervention in Ukraine. And right now, I give that a 60% likelihood. They have moved military troops into Belarus. And Belarus, the government there, it's actually, Putin and Lukashenko have not exactly had a lovey-dovey history. But it became blatantly obvious in the last year that the U.S. was launching another color revolution type hybrid warfare to try to remove him from office. And Russia actually would like to see Lukashenko gone. They just didn't want to see the wife, the liberal wife of a blogger who is surrounded by former U.S. Government employees, state media people with 5% actual support in the country. This Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, not Guaido. That's the U.S. president of another country.
Guaido, Venezuela. Yeah.
And then a lot of that was directed out of Ukraine. A lot of that regime change effort. And then there was also the incident just prior to the Belarusian election, where it has now been openly admitted by the Ukrainian government that they created this intelligence hoax, the attempted scandal, the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence. They contacted a number of Russian security contractors, mercenaries, and they said, look, we have some work for you in Venezuela. Really good salary, just guarding some oil fields. And we're going to fly you out of Minsk because of coronavirus measures. Everybody was flying out of Minsk at that point to go to Europe. It was much easier. They got a bunch of people. They're interested. They got them there. They set them up in a little hostel type, and then like a sanatorium. And then they called up the Belarusian government and said, hey, there's a bunch of Russian mercenaries here with plans to overthrow your government. It sounds ludicrous, but these aren't really serious people in intelligence. And, Lukashenko probably for about a few hours, took the idea seriously. He knows that Putin has, they haven't had the best lovey-dovey relationship, and he's kept flirting with the West in order to try to get better gas prices and so forth. I mean, it was just a little, 2 years ago that he was doing photo ops with Mike Pompeo and so on.
Yeah, he's opportune. It reminds me of Erdogan a little bit. He's trying to get the most he can from both sides.
Yeah, he is, right? And I certainly have no love for him, but I don't want to see him replaced in another Maidan type event either. The actual more pro-Russian candidates are actually the most popular candidates in the prison. He imprisoned them as well, but you never hear about that in the Western media. But Putin has decided better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, at least for now. But anyway, Lukashenko recovered from all of that. He figured out what was going on. The Ukrainian government has openly admitted it since then. It's been printed on, the front page of all, the serious Western newspapers and so on. So it's not like it's even in question. And Lukashenko's mad at the regime in Kiev now. That's two big things against him. And so he said, yeah, okay. If he's not actively going to participate in a potential Russian military intervention, then he's at least going to allow Russian forces to go up and over, and there they can go just 80 kilometers down to Kiev. And that is the decapitation strike. So now, if they're going to launch a military...
The exercise that they're doing right now, we see all kinds of footage of equipment going by rail and all that. Some news about the Belarus railway, I guess, got hacked, and so they interfered with that. I don't know how much that shut them, if it just slowed it down, showed if they got that worked out or not. But so this exercise, is this an annual thing? No. Is this something that was planned recently?
Nope.
So when was it planned?
No, I mean, possibly, but it certainly wasn't announced. This is what you would call a snap military exercise.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, it does. This is, I mean, Russia has not regularly conducted big military exercises in Belarus except for the last year, right? They've not been involved in that, despite the union state technically between the two of them. But Lukashenko has had his back up against the wall for the last year, and everything has changed. No, these are either, take your pick. This is more Russian saber rattling, impressing on them the seriousness of we're serious. Let's resolve this by diplomacy. Do you want to call it coercive diplomacy? Or the idea, that they made maximalist demands, but they're willing to talk down to it if the U.S. gives serious, response and shows it's willing to make concessions, or that Russia knows that the United States is not and will never agree to any of that, and they're preparing for it, or they're preparing for it, hoping for the best, but knowing that they may have to go through if their bluff is called. Because I don't think that Putin bluffs. You can not like Putin. You can, whatever you may think of him. He is an intelligent person who fights very, very hard for his country's national interests, particularly his security interests, which the entire Russian political elite, not just Putin, sees now as being threatened. I don't think he bluffs.
Yeah, I believe that as well. At least I have not seen him bluff yet.
So this is a serious possibility, and I rate it as a 60% possibility. And
the decapitation option?
I'll say 60% intervention. Then we talk about options for the intervention.
Oh, we have percentages for those too? Oh, good.
Now, I don't want to go that far. I don't know if I want to go that far to talk about perceptions of those.
How about this? Are they all possible? Are all of those things possible, do you think?
Yes. I mean, within...
Yeah.
Ukrainian government has said there's no imminent attack, right? There's not going to be an attack in the next 2 to 3 days, right? There will probably not be an intervention during the Beijing Olympics, right? But...
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah. Let's talk about that in a minute.
Sure. In about 3 weeks, there could be an intervention, like around February 20th. The Russian has the time to move the forces that we have seen moving into the proper positions and move the missing military elements like field hospitals and stuff that they would need that they have not set up yet. So again, I don't think a final decision has been made. Right now, they're still waiting for an official written response from the US and NATO.
Yeah, and they're I don't know if this was definitive, but at least tentatively, there was another Minsk talks set up in Paris, right? Did that happen?
Yeah, there was a Normandy Format meeting today.
today.
And the Normandy Format is between France and Germany and Kiev and Russia. And Russia has actually been refusing those meetings for the last 2 years any further because they haven't implemented any of the results of the previous ones.
Right.
So you're still not implementing the Minsk Accords. And Kiev says, well, let's talk about the Minsk Accords. Let's talk about rewriting them. And Russia's like, no, implement the Minsk Accords. It has been approved in a UN Security Council resolution. And Kiev says, no, they're terrorists. All the people in East Ukraine are terrorists. We're not talking to them. We're not sitting down and talking with them. We're not giving them amnesty. We're not going to, federalize the country. We're not going to politically reconcile. No. And Russia's like, okay, then that's clear.
There's nothing to talk about.
There's nothing to talk about anymore, right?
Yeah.
And in the course of all this, they've agreed, but I don't expect anything to come out of this. Just the Kiev regime foreign minister was just saying earlier today that Ukraine, meaning the Kiev regime, will make no concessions. So I don't believe this because they know very well what would happen. If Zelensky started to implement the Minsk Accords and he sat down face to face with the political leadership of the Eastern Ukraine, and they talked about federalizing the country and amnesty for everyone and the removal of all foreign forces from the country, and including, of course, NATO and the 10,000 NATO troops and advisors. The ultranationalists, the Banderite fascists that have become fully, Azov, the right sector, that now have become fully integrated into the military, the security services. They almost entirely comprise the National Guard throughout all the major Maidan political parties. They would stage another Maidan. We would see a third, or sometimes they call it a fourth Maidan, and Zelensky would be overthrown by the people that helped, create that regime, fought it into power in Kiev in the first place, because they are a minority of the country. Ukrainians are not Nazis, right? That's nonsense. Right. No one in Russia is saying that, but there is a powerful,
they're shock troops. It's their shock troops.
They're a vanguard. They're an ideological vanguard. They are, the descendants of the Nazi collaborators from World War II in West Ukraine. And again, West Ukraine wasn't actually part of Ukraine until just before World War II. Yeah. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The real divide here is in Ukraine, because Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine, the people there have two completely different conceptions of what it means to be a Ukrainian, of Ukrainian national identity. Central to the conception of Western Ukrainians is hatred of Russians. Central to the conception of East Ukrainians is, hey, the Russians are our brothers right across the border. In fact, I'm married to one of them, and our families are so intermingled we can't tell the difference, and we don't really care. Those are two irreconcilable. And serious people have seen this civil divide in the country. And Ukrainian presidents have kept the country together by not swinging too far to either one side or the other side of the country. And also then geopolitically, not siding too much with the West or too much with Russia, but keeping Ukraine a neutral state. But the US, the EU decided that that neutral Ukraine wasn't good enough anymore. And then we had the Maidan and everything that has happened since then to permanently drag Ukraine, silencing all the political voices of East Ukraine, banning the communist and all the leftist parties in the country, lustrating and conducting a pogrom of the other, East Ukrainian parties, silencing the media, shutting down all the TV stations, the media outlets, because they're pro-Russian, right? Because that is a treason now. If you have a different conception of Ukrainian foreign policy than what seized power in the Maidan, now you're a traitor, right? There is no going back. And right now, the US and the EU are like a dog urinating all over Ukraine, saying this is our territory now. We geopolitically flipped it. They were even calling Ukraine the West's eastern flank. Like, when did since 2014. And not as reported in the pro-US, American-run, pro-Maidan Kiev Post, that the majority of Ukrainians, a slim majority, we're talking 51-45, like numbers for several months, the majority of Ukrainians were against the Maidan. But they were not the most politically active and passionate. I mean, you know, the William Butler Yeats poem, The Second Coming, the worst are filled with passionate intensity. Well, that's the best are filled with apathy, and the worst full of passionate intensity. That's the condition that we've had here.
Yeah, it's pretty pessimistic, but
now Zelensky has imprisoned both of the major opposition party leaders on either side of him. The former president Poroshenko, who had brought treason charges against the previous president, Yanukovych, of course, and against Medvedchuk, the leader of the opposition bloc representing East Ukraine. He's imprisoned both of them on the same nonsense treason charges of buying coal from the Donbass, because the Donbass is full of terrorists, of course, and that's treason.
Hey, I saw that Poroshenko was flying back into the country. I guess he had fled. He's in jail now?
He has avoided jail, but been tagged with an electronic bracelet and had his passport taken away from him pending the court date.
And then Medvedchuk, is he the head?
He's also on house arrest.
Is he the head of the
opposition
resurgent Party of Regions?
Yes, you could say that. The reformed, what was left after the Party of Regions, after it was lustrated, and the Communist Party after it was banned, you know, basically the political voice of East Ukraine, they reformed into the opposition bloc, technically the opposition bloc Party of Life. And he emerged on top of that. And, right before Zelensky went after Medvedchuk with these nonsense, politicized treason charges, the opposition bloc had just emerged as the most popular political party in the country.
Yeah,
then it has taken a nosedive since then, of course. Zelensky's own approval rating, 75% when he took office and was promising to bring peace to the country, it's now down in the low 20s. So you see the motivation for him imprisoning both of his political opponents and banning all media in the country that's been critical of him.
I have to say I'm thoroughly confused by Zelensky now. I think he's
a hostage.
Just a puppet.
He's a hostage to the regime that he inherited, which of course also has puppet strings then on to the US, right?
Because I heard him, saying, chill, don't worry, everything's fine and all this stuff. And then I saw him doing a speech that was extremely hawkish. And I was like, well, which is it? And I thought, because we talked a lot in the run up to his election and after his election, and his platform was all about peace, right? And normalizing relations. And
I think we talked then, and I told you to be wary of Zelensky.
I probably.
He just spoke. He talks different things to different people. When he's talking to the media straight up, knowing the Western media is in the room, he says different things. He was speaking to his domestic intelligence service 2 days ago, and he said that we have learned to combat influence in our country. Now is the time for offensive action. And then he went on to say that in the next breath that all the people of Ukraine are united in their demand that we take our territory back.
Yeah, that is the one that floored me, because I think that's a flat out lie, isn't it?
That's not political reconciliation. That's not the Minsk Accords. That's war talk, and which is a little silly for him to be doing right now, when at least, everyone in the West is saying that Russia is about to militarily intervene in his country in a major way. And that could be anything from taking the rest of the Donbass, taking the government, the Kiev regime controlled parts of the Donbass. It could be to taking all or most of eastern Ukraine, where there would be the least resistance, where the most people would be, accepting of that, who have been, vote for the opposition bloc, have always been opposed to the Maidan and what seized power in Kiev. Maybe not to as great an extent as the Crimea and Donbass, but still relatively, or a decapitation strike. Doing all that, but also circling around from above and taking out Kiev, because the Russian government does not see the Ukrainian people as their enemy. And they would like to, if they intervene, they would like to minimize casualties as low as possible, because they still hope to win the hearts and minds of most Ukrainians, maybe not West Ukrainians, that's a lost cause, right? But the majority of central Ukrainians say back. And the Ukrainian army is mostly conscripts, right? They're conscripted into military service. And every Ukrainian conscript that is killed by a Russian cruise missile or a Russian airstrike is a Ukrainian family that will hate Russia forever, right? Russia doesn't want that, right? I mean, on a personal basis, they regard Ukrainians as their brother people. On a simply, realist mindset, they won't have influence in Ukraine anymore at all. If the intervention was, excessive and bloody and there were tens of thousands of dead. So the best thing for them is from their perspective, is to remove the regime in Kiev, and basically, the US, the UK have been calling, Russia's considering putting a puppet regime in Kiev. Yes, to replace the puppet regime that you put in Kiev when you threw over the Yanukovych government, however flawed, in 2014.
So that wasn't nonsense?
No, the reports of it were nonsense because of who the UK, from their anonymous sources, was suggesting it would be. They were suggesting a former Rada member, Edward Marayev, who has been sanctioned by Russia since 2018. It's nonsense. Even the pro-Maidan, pro-Kiev journalists in Ukraine are like, well, that's just silly stuff. We're not even we don't want to report that, right? Because that's ludicrous. Yes, Russia probably does have plans to do that, but that's not the guy.
Right. That's interesting.
It shows how not serious their analysis and their conception of either Ukraine or Russia really is, which is pretty scary, actually.
I have a million questions. Anyway, we covered that a little bit. I caught a bit of Alexander Mercourse's stream recently, and he said he's come to the conclusion that the people driving this whole thing, at least at the media level, is MI6. Basically, not just the media level, driving this whole effort to gin up whichever, to provoke Russia into doing something, or to start something on our side. I mean, there are a lot of ways this could go. And I wondered what, you think about that they are the main driver of this.
I mean, they're certainly driving the UK media. I mean, they've long driven that, and they are certainly ginning it up and spinning it the way they want to. But I think irrespective of that, Russia has long been preparing this. We talked earlier about what happened with the Russian military buildup in April. Right.
Yeah.
When Russia was going to invade then. And it was large, and it was obvious, and it was intended to be seen, and it was an exercise, and it went home. But I believe it was also two things. One, it was a trial run. And two, it was a warning. We're about to engage in serious, high tense diplomacy, and we're serious. And then they went back to the barracks, and they went down. I think Russia has been planning this for some time now. I don't believe the whole thing is ginned up by MI6. They're certainly spinning it like crazy the way they want to, but I do think that the Russian government has been moving. Unfortunately, they see no other options towards this for some time now. And they wanted to give diplomacy one last serious chance, and made sure that the U.S. was paying attention while they were doing it. But now, if it was a bluff, the bluff has been called. Now, what did they do?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I forgot my question. uh, oh, so what I always wondered all along was whether this was just projection, saying the Russians are going to invade Ukraine when really they were setting up to invade Eastern Ukraine and just, to basically to try to fix a failed operation back in whatever 2015, an embarrassing failure of their anti-terrorist operation. And of course, lots of people are just still pissed off about Crimea, which
that's
a done deal, right? That's not going to change.
I mean, my wife is Crimean, right?
Yeah.
My wife is from Simferopol. My in-laws are in Simferopol, and we have family all over East Ukraine, Kharkov, Odessa, Donbass, and they're the East Ukrainian, South Ukrainian people whose views are never ever aired or given. Those people have no agency. Those are all Putin's puppets and so on. Whereas the people that we back in Western Ukraine and that seized power in Kiev, they have full agency, right? We have no strings over them except for Joe Biden bragging that he removed government officials when they might have been investigating the company that employed his son in a no-show chairman of the board job and everything. But I mean, Crimea, you don't have to take my word for it, and you don't have to take the Russian government's word for it, but just take a look at the polling that Pew and Gallup and GFK have done that show even higher levels of support among the Crimean people for reunification with Russia. My wife voted in the referendum to reunify. And when I first met my wife in Boston, at a nightclub, a goth nightclub, actually, I recognized that she was somewhere from Eastern Europe. And I said, where are you from? And she said, Crimea. And I said, oh, you're Ukrainian.
Mm-hmm.
And this was 2001. And she slapped me across the face. Right?
Always autonomous, right? Yeah.
And that was my introduction to Russian, Ukrainian identity issues in the Crimea and so on. So I've learned a lot since then. No, the Crimean people are more patriotic than the people in Moscow are.
Now,
but
the other thing, let me just add on to that question. So if you said there's 125,000 Ukrainian troops and whoever's joining them. Now, back in 2015, there were some really nasty people on the front lines of that in what I call the shock troops. So the people in Eastern Ukraine are in real danger, right? These are people who slaughter them. They are ideological.
I will tell you who to follow. There is a British independent journalist. He's not employed by the Russian government or media. He lives completely off of Patreon. He's a photojournalist, Dean O'Brien, Dino Bino 1 on Twitter. Dean O'Brien, you can find him. He has been in Donbass for much of the last 8 years. He went there, thought he was going to be reporting one thing about the Russian aggression and so on, and discovered that he was living through an entirely different thing, and fell in love with the unvoiced cause of the voices of the people of Eastern Ukraine. And he's the one to follow on this, and he will show you that if you follow him every day, he recounts the shelling that has occurred, that the people have to run and hide in their basements. And that was something that Poroshenko said out loud back in 2015. That's how we will win this war, because our children will go to school and, play outside, and their children will live huddled in the cold.
Oh, I remember that.
And I mean, that has been, not entirely living there, but having to run there at a moment's notice, at least within a certain range of the border for quite some time now. And he recounts the daily numbers of injured, the shelling, exactly what has occurred where, and the people that are injured and killed, every week, every day, every week it happens. And it has been happening. And there's well over 14,000 dead now. And that's presented as, Russia killed 14,000 Ukrainians. But no, that's nothing to do with it. This is Ukrainians killing Ukrainians. This is what has happened. This is the regime that seized power in Kiev, sent their tanks and APCs that with military they could gather together, because actually most of the military refused to fight in 2014. Yeah. They defected or they quit, right? In fact, even Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty admitted, right, the video is still out there, that 75% of the Ukrainian Navy defected.
Yeah.
Well, that's not ships. Quite what they're telling us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't like what happened in their country. Not just the ships, but the personnel as well.
Yeah.
75% of the personnel.
I don't know whether the ships were even worth, but anyway.
Yeah. What happened in the Donbass is, yes, it was a lot of coal miners and factory workers, but it was also the military and the police and the security services that said, we don't agree with what happened. That our government that we voted into office, in Eastern Ukraine in a huge majority, being overthrown. And, we're not being a part of this. We don't want to be turned into an anti-Russian NATO outpost. That's not who we are.
I remember the footage. There was another British guy at that time on the ground, because I couldn't understand what anybody was saying, except
Graham
him.
Williams. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And,
he's a little more gonzo, but his heart's in the right place.
At that time, he did good work. I would not have had this perspective if not for him. But I remember the footage of the babushkas coming out of their houses and,
meeting tanks,
chasing the guys at the APCs and shaming them.
What are you doing?
Turn around. They're coming out in the middle of the street, and these Ukrainian troops are just getting out, turning around and abandoning the equipment. And
there was only one Ukrainian military unit cohesive that responded to Kiev's orders. They went there, were met by ordinary people. Citizens, their tanks.
Particularly the women.
They went up, they gave up and went home. The military unit was disbanded by Kiev. And then they sent in the battalion. Because those were the ideologicals. Those were the vanguards. They had already been fighting on the Maidan. And who led them on the Maidan? Who led the so-called civil defense force of the Maidan? Andrei Parubi, who founded the Social Nationalist Party of Ukraine along with
scary dude.
That man is a straight up hardcore. He's not even a neo-Nazi. He's an old school Banderite fascist Nazi. And this guy was feted in the U.S. He then became the speaker of the Putsch Rada, after all this was said and done. And he was feted in Canada, in the United States, in the UK, everyone doing photo ops with him. And if you'll remember at the time, it was Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone who actually went to the meeting where he was being feted and called him out, and they took the mic away from him and took him out of the room, of course, rather than having, the guy's a straight up Nazi. And he was in charge of the battalions on the Maidan, and he's probably the one, according to all the evidence that's out there. Remember the whole question of what actually happened in the Maidan with the, supposed Yanukovych police opening fire on protesters, but then a number of police were also shot and killed. And 8 years on, that case has never resolved.
Yeah, I'll link an episode that I did on that one of someone who's been researching that.
That's not what happened. Parubi got in a bunch of Georgian mercenaries who were shuttled in by his own battalions into the hotel overlooking the square there. And they created the perfect sacralizing moment, right? This false flag event where they shot both protesters and police. And that provided the whole justification for the supra-democratic moment where the elected president was just driven out of the country by the right sector and so on that occupied the Rada and the presidential administration building. But it was justified in the name that Yanukovych killed, innocent people. And,
I'm hearing things that whatever, they're black and red, blood and soil flag or whatever.
Yes.
I think I forget what
the old flag. Yeah. Today it's the flag of the right sector. It's red and black.
Is it true that some government buildings are flying that flag?
Oh, yeah, all the time. In fact, the Ukrainian military is now flying that flag. The Ukrainian military has been purged. There were just big tank exercises. I posted on it about 2 weeks ago where they're flying the Ukrainian flag and the black and red flag. Now it's the flag of right sector, but it was the flag in World War II of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, who were the Nazi collaborators who fought in SS uniforms and participated in the Holocaust so enthusiastically that the German SS were even taken aback and were like, whoa, you guys are hardcore.
That's still, I still can't. Did you see the thing with Evelyn Farkas?
Yes, I was just going to say that.
I was just going to say neocons. Yeah.
Yes, there was just an article in Newsweek about this by Tom O'Connor about 3 weeks ago. He hasn't written everything great, but he went into this and talked about how, well, actually, these neo-Nazis are all over the place. They're integrated into everything. And the FBI is constantly warning about our own white supremacists and, racists who are going there, training with them after our military has trained them, and then bringing it back to the US, and it is a terrorist and hate threat. But as long as it's over there and they're fighting Russians. And one of the big things they say, oh, Zelensky's of Jewish descent. How can Ukraine, be a Nazi country? And, the answer is that, for right now, for the last 8 years, these people's hatred has been focused on ethnic Russians, leftists, and they're called Slovak East Ukrainians. And as long as their hatred is focused on that, and that's the most visible display, other than the occasional gypsy camp and so on, then that's okay. That's acceptable. Those are our fascists. And the U.S. did that at the end of World War II. This is actually all history redux. At the end of World War II, the Ukraine was supporting these people in Western Ukraine as an insurgency against the Soviet Union. They were arming them. Dulles called them our fascists. Those are our bastards. And it's all happened again. And then they came back to, when they lost eventually and came back to the US. They are a large part of the Ukrainian diaspora in the US and Canada. And they have reformed the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists there. There are actually memorials to Banderite fascists all over the northern US and Canada. And a perfect example of this is Chrystia Freeland, who was the foreign minister of Canada. Her father was doing propaganda for the Nazis in Western Ukraine and covering up for the Holocaust. And she on one hand denies it and the other hand proudly embraces him. And actual historians are like, well, actually, he was, and it did happen, and you really shouldn't be proud of it. But these people have driven the Ukrainian lobby in the US and Canada, which is a powerful lobby, especially when it comes to Russia, for, since the 1950s. And we see how powerful they are today. And Vindman, I'm sorry, is just another example of exactly, that capture of, and that, the idea that we can make all of Ukraine like that.
And at the same time, I don't know how plugged into the zeitgeist you are here, but we're creating new organizations to fight
yes,
white supremacists, neo-Nazis.
It's the rise against
it's the
movement,
greatest threat.
The rise against movement or
whatever. I don't know what the current day
they trained
is,
with Azov in Ukraine. The same Azov that is, having, literal neo-Nazi flash parties with SS and Wolf Angels and everything, who, their founder talks about the white race of Ukraine and so on.
But it's an existential threat here.
Yeah.
Here over there, we'll give them
Evelyn Farkas said the Ukraine, the government there is in an existential fight, and they need anyone they can get. So the ideology of these people is not important.
I don't know. I think somebody may have said that about the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Moderate rebels, moderate jihadis in Syria, in Afghanistan, the right-wing death squads in South America. There's a long history of this, right? And also, it just emerged in the last couple of weeks. The CIA, the ground branch paramilitary.
Hold on to that thought. That's my bonus question for you. Anything else you want to say before we roll into the bonus question?
No, there we go.
Okay. Yeah. So what's going on with this ground branch?
Yeah.
What's going on with, mercenaries like embedded into the Ukraine military? Yeah. And why, if these ground branch paramilitaries, if they've been around since whatever, 2014, did they say? Or first of all, were they part of that ATO operation? Were they part of those shock troops that, were formed in the forward, what were those called? Those white privet bank vans and things that, people were doing just, horrible things. And why did they suddenly release this information now? Visit aroundtheempire.com to find the various ways that you can gain access to the bonus content, join the Discord community, and participate in the periodic Zoom calls where we talk among ourselves. I hope that some of you will join us, and now we'll continue with the wrap-up. All right. Well, thank you for taking all this time, Mark. I really appreciate it. And make sure to tell everybody.
I'm sorry if I depressed.
Well, no, no, not your fault. Make sure you tell everybody how to follow your work and how to get in touch with you, things like that.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm easy enough to find there. I'm on Sputnik's radio shows several times a week. I'm on the Critical Hour almost every other day, but also Political Misfits and I got to remember everyone now. The Backstory and Fault Lines and everyone else there. And of course, I'm regularly on Russian media and Chinese studios earlier today there. Do in the US, unfortunately, is Fringy Left shows.
All right, well, take care, and thank you so much for what you're doing. I really appreciate your perspective. It's really important.
Thanks for having me. Take
care, Mark.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Mark Sleboda. Follow him on Twitter at MarkSleboda1 and look for his appearances on RT, Sputnik, and other international channels. This is a fully independent podcast, and in the age of censorship, your support is more important than ever. Go to the website aroundtheempire.com to find the various ways that you can get access to the bonus content and support the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave reviews, those help. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire. Join us on Telegram, t.me/aroundtheempire. And we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody. Stay strong.